In various articles and interviews, there is the statement made that to abolish prostitution, we need to deal with demand. So, the Johns and the pimps. How do we deal with the demand issue?
Well, first of all, we need to take demand much more seriously, and it starts by following the money. Human trafficking, sex trafficking in particular, is demand driven. It is only in place and on the scale that it is happening because men are willing to pay for sex with people who are under the control of violent criminals. And our research for Invisible Chains found that men in Canada either don't know or don't care that the person they're paying for sex with is under the control of someone else. It's a consideration which has not entered the minds of many of them, and particularly with the younger victims, it has not really slowed business at all. In fact, we see a really horrific correlation between reverse correlation between the age of a victim and how much a man pays to abuse them. The younger the victim, the more that men pay for sex acts with that victim. And we know from cases like Imani Nekpangi, who's the first convicted human trafficker in Canada, his victim was a 14-year-old girl with fetal alcohol syndrome, and the second victim, a 15-year-old girl who was homeless. And Canadian men, thousands of them, had no problem paying over $400,000 in total to sexually abuse these two young girls. They are still suffering long-term trauma even though their trafficker is still in jail, and not a single one of the thousands of men who paid to abuse them has faced any kind of criminal penalty whatsoever. Even though we have stiff laws on the books dealing with paying for a sex act with a minor, we rarely see the charges ever laid, even in situations like this, where the case is really open and shut in terms of the age of the victim. And furthermore, we don't see any kind of call for action against them. Instead, what we often see in the media or in apologists for prostitution is to blame the victims, to say, well, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they escape? And doing a bit more digging, you find out why. The 15-year-old girl, she was subject to physical violence, beatings. He tattooed his name on the back of her neck. He then threatened to kidnap her younger brother, a 3-year-old boy, if she didn't continue to be compliant with her being sold for sex. He took every dime, by the way, and sold her through Craigslist on the internet while moving her through apartments and hotels in the Greater Toronto area. And that was the first case of human trafficking. It's not the only one. We now have a whole book full of real cases from across Canada, every region of country, where this is happening. And it affects not only adults and children. It not only affects newcomers, but also Canadian citizens, Canadian women and underage girls. And so we really need to focus on the fact that this problem would not exist were it not for the demand that was paying to target these young girls and allowing traffickers to lucratively profit. Public awareness is also key. The province of Manitoba started a campaign called Stop Sex with Kids. It's a good starting point. And it has been a really high-profile campaign, handing out leaflets with television ads. There's a really cool online component to it. And it tells the real stories of people who have been sold for sex in the streets of Winnipeg and tries to really change public attitudes about this. We also need to see tougher enforcement of laws dealing with car confiscations for men who use their vehicles to solicit for sex acts with individuals. We also need to see greater use of what are often called prostitution offender programs, try to change the attitudes of men who are first-time so-called non-violent offenders is usually what they're referred to, although this is a crime that inherently carries violence with it. And so those sort of shifts in public attitudes are needed as well. And we need our political leaders to stand up against this. In a country like Sweden, it wasn't just changing the law. People often say, well, Swedish law changed to criminalize the purchase but not the sale of sex, and they decided to leave it there. It also involved over $30 million in exit programs and support for public attitude shifts to the society as people became aware of what was really happening in their country in the sex trade. And it also involved the most senior politicians speaking out against prostitution as a form of violence against women. And we don't see that in Canada whatsoever. We don't even see it from female politicians, incidentally. It's not even a question of it's only the boys will be boys thing. We don't even see leadership yet from our female political leaders either. And so this is something where we need to see much more of a community movement across the country. I can tell you from having worked in Ottawa in Parliament as a senior advisor to a cabinet minister that what gets noticed is media and a groundswell of public support to deal with an issue. Not one or two emails here or there, but when there's an organized movement, groups of people, coalitions of individuals who represent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And that's why the faith-based community has been so effective in other countries at rallying behind the cause of those who are unseen and unheard. There's a lot of really powerful reasons that people will find in their own faith backgrounds for why this is an issue, and I don't think people should shy away from those. I think that's the motivation that you bring to the table. Then you should be proud of that, and you should carry that through, and to not be ashamed of it. This is a country that's supposed to have respect for freedom of expression and freedom of religion, and I think we don't see enough of people speaking out from their own convictions about why something like this is so wrong. And because the fact is that there are both private as well as public, secular versus religious, and academic versus personal reasons for finding that prostitution is a form of violence against women and it needs to end. And so all of those reasons need to be really marshaled and rallied. And it's not the first time. You know, when slavery was abolished, it was a large group, a large coalition, both secular and religious. The Quakers played a huge role in abolishing slavery, for example. And we need to see a similar movement in Canada get active.